why don't you have primary elections within BJP or within NDA to have a candidate, because this is a large country. To reach out to 120 crore people requires hell lot of time, and I think we're already short of the 2014 milestone. If we keep with this incrementalism, because this incrementalism led us to Kushwaha, which was really a big upset for all the BJP supporters. So please take this advice that stop this incrementalism, look at the larger picture.
That is not done as though in isolation. State elections, whether for the Congress, whether for the Communist Party, whether for the BJP, for whichever party, cannot be in isolation. Otherwise, how would you, let us say, pull up the Congress based on their defeat in Uttar Pradesh? Congress also lost in Uttar Pradesh, not just us. You can tell me that incrementalism in BJP, Kushwaha, therefore you lost. For a minute, let me say I agree with you. For a minute. Although I'm going to definitely even disengage that argument. So, if state elections are also partly reflective of what is the national mood, you cannot ignore the outcome of a state assembly election and say, forget the state election, you can't go step by step, you're not going to look at only after acquiring 20 states will you win this nation. You can win the central government directly. These are, issues which you can tackle separately. Is absolutely inconsistent.
Ramesh Pokhriyal from stopping, spoiling the show. And I don't see, I'll tell you, Sumit won't allow further debate, but I'm sure we'll have it another day.
I'll just continue with your Nishank ji ka argument. I was there for the 2 months during the election. Please elaborate on it again.
Ghanduri's defeat, which was, almost a clear winner. And, so your argument of incrementalism showing us the nation's mood is not valid, because you are taking linearity and uniform nature, which for a philosophy and a student and a science student isn't the way how reality is governed.
First objection. Public mood, people's priorities while voting does not go on a scientific basis. And that is one of the reasons why psephologists have not ever succeeded in reading the Indian voters' mind. No, wait a minute. Real science in election has to come through in some way. It comes through your psephology. If it is not that, tell me, is there a set of scientists who are sitting in the CERN labs who are going to come here and tell us the same philosophy of the standard module? No, sir. Sociology and politics are very, very intermingled. Sociology and politics are so intermingled that your linear analysis or any other analysis will fall flat on its face when you're talking about the caste-based influences that we have even today, whether you like it or whether I like it. So there are factors which are not palpable, quantifiable, measurable by any one of your psephologists or anybody, quack or otherwise. And therefore, to assume that, and again, even going by the measures that you are trying to bring in for greater scientific sounding measure of elections, how can you prove that Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank spoiled the game in Uttaranchal? How are you able to prove that? Excuse me, he's my leader. He's part of my party. And I'm here now as a spokesperson of my party. And if there is any problem with anybody, the party has its internal mechanisms to set them right. You may not be even cognizant of what is going on within the party in terms of corrections which will happen, deviations which will have to be managed.
You can take a hands count here. Karnataka again is a big mess, all created because of poor leadership of Nitin Gadkari, and in spite of all repeated failures, he continues to be projected as the president for the next term. It is completely unacceptable, and I don't know, your antennas were up the moment you heard the word science, but that's not a positive sign really. You know, I'm a science student. I'm an engineer from IIT Kharagpur and an MBA from IIM Calcutta. I've been in corporate world for about 13-14 years and been in the movement for about 2.5 years, very closely watching from the ground in 8 different states. And I can tell you very clearly that if you take your own video of the speech that you began with, by denying that Congress should not be used as a springboard or a bouncing board, but you are yourself going into that same trap. The moment I asked you that provocative question, you again made Congress as your plan to define that Congress should be more worried.
You, in your enthusiasm to prove that you're trying to bring in a great deal of science into this, you seem to be losing sight that you're not the first person to talk about scientific methods in politics. The science in politics, which is studied under the humanities, still has its own measures of looking at behavioral practices of people who make up for voters, which is you and me. Your science is welcome, sir, and one is not frightened of that. But science has to be tempered down to understand that what you do in science in a perfect lab setting does not work in a ground level constituency where priorities are based on many other things which include sentiment about my own man who's contesting, who belongs to my community. And therefore there, that perfect ceteris paribus of your lab will not work. And therefore, your science is welcome, your criticism is very welcome, I will hear it, I'll also probably give the feedback to my party because it has to benefit from your scientific thinking, but accommodate, first of all, that there are many unseen, unknown to you factors which play up for a decision making in a party. So many things which you are not privy to, which I am not privy to, also influence decision making. And not just because I am a party spokesperson, particularly of the BJP, but also because at a personal level, I think your judgment about Mr. Gadkari is completely wrong. A person who has come from outside Delhi to understand the politics in Delhi, to run a national party which with a very transparent ways of taking decision making is available for you, me and the media to, as opposed to what is happening in a very secretive and guarded way in Andhra Pradesh, itself should be giving you a lot of answers for the questions that you are persistently asking me. Because if you put the same measure of what is happening in Karnataka versus what is happening in Andhra Pradesh, many more questions will be relevant. True. And I go back for your convincing, you're going back to talking about Congress in spite of what I've said there at the beginning. Congress is also a national political party against whom we are fighting, so I can't ignore them. So ask the same questions that you asked of me as regards Karnataka's political decision making that my party president takes in an open, transparent manner, consulting every MLA there. May not give us best of imagery. It may not make me be perceived as a better managed party. It might give me a mixed view from the public. It might make my party feel as if, why can't I handle it better? There are lessons for us to learn, no doubt. But to have to thrash BJP's decision making just because it is visible for you and just because what the opposite is not visible for you in Andhra Pradesh, for instance, to think that you can pass a judgment saying useless president so and so, I'm sorry, that's a bit too much.
Being a doctor also, 90% people want change in government. They want the replacement. More than 90 you can say, but 90% is a fair guess. Can BJP replace Congress? That is the question. Because it is topical to the topic.
I agree. Yes, I'm glad you're asking that question. And I've in fact, the first line I said at the beginning was, because the mood of the nation is what it is now, even the question or the topic of the discussion of this particular session was beginning from, okay, if not Congress, who else? How the BJP? And in fact, I even give a lot of respect to that much debated issue of Advani ji post Mumbai National Executive, saying the BJP should rise, why hasn't it risen, to capture the popular mood. As a very seasoned elder, he did observe that if the mood of the nation is going against Congress, the BJP should do a lot more to be able to stand up and meet it. It was a very genuine feeling about the party. And therefore, that question that you ask is on similar lines. The party will have to do a lot more, and I'll concede that, a lot more to manage perceptions and also to be genuinely taking up a lot more issues, specifically on, say, economy, specifically on what the failures of the Congress are, specifically on what we will do when we come to power in 2014, and so on. No doubt on that. Can is not the question. That we should is the question. Otherwise, we have a very big danger in this country that unless there is a national party, unless there is a party which, even if it doesn't come singularly to power, even if it comes only as a result of a coalition, will not have the direction to lead this country, especially now that we are at a crossroads. We are at a crossroads in the sense that decision making is suffering, there is paralysis, there is absolutely no going forward happening on any front. And therefore, yes, it's not can, it's more that we should, because it's timely. Obviously, that follows, and that's why I said there are a lot of works happening which you'll little by little get to seeing. But can is not the issue, we should is my argument.
Going by the scenario of journalism these days, is it the media that's deciding the issues?
Yes, to an extent. If you look at the way in which issues get prioritized in terms of occupying a national debating space or pushing agendas for decision making, yes, to a large extent, I would say some issues do get prioritized based on the way in which the media prioritizes it. But that doesn't mean all of them find their logical conclusion. They do float along, or they do rise with the media pressure, with the media priorities. But after a point, what I would call the typical Indian strength prevails, where they put to the usual debates, discussions, arguments, and then the usual competent authorities, whether it is the parliament, whether it's the court, whether it's the public, they take over it. And some are left off midway, some are taken further, and very few probably reach the logical conclusion. So like many other segments of the society which take up an issue, the media also does take up issues. And sometimes it may even give us an appearance or make us have a kind of a feeling that media probably is setting the agenda. But I'm not sure it completely does that. Yes, sometimes it does, but going through the usual process of Indian arguments, dialogue and debate, and competent authorities which take up the issue because of the pressure, they do remain in the high priority for some time, but after a while they also wilt away, wither away, die away without finding a logical conclusion. But some luckily last longer. Very few find a logical end.
Madam, probably this question is again for you. Why is the BJP not on social media?
I'm not sure that's right. BJP, I think, if anything, I've heard some congressmen tell me, and I'm not naming any of them, in a very friendly kind of a tone, that your party is so active on social media. You know, actually we are the envy of many other parties, that we are very active in social media. I'm not sure whether we are the first step in it, whether we are instigating it, we are initiating it, we are the spark plugs for it. No. Probably it is because of y'all pushing us to do a lot of things. We are there, and therefore we are there much better than many other parties. So it's not as if, yeah. Yeah, there are various, I mean, that is another, the second point that I was going to make. It may not be BJP, Facebook on its own, but then Advani ji has his blog. There's also a Facebook entry. Then so is Nitin Gadkari ji, the president, and so is the BJP's own, page, and so on the Communication Samvaad cell and so on. There are various little avenues and windows through which the BJP's social media networking is happening. And of course, aside from this, state chief ministers also run their own, If you're looking at specific Twitter handle, I think no, there is no party's Twitter handle, but we all know Sushma ji runs her Twitter, Modi ji runs his, and to some extent I think Tarun Vijay is also active on, I exist on Twitter, but I'm not really live, or I'm not really active. So I think we are slowly entering in many ways, but the presence is more from the point of view of positions taken after a time gap. So it sort of defeats the purpose. You expect when you're on social media, like instant, this minute BJP has to say why it's not doing this or why it is doing a certain other. But I think given the time gap, one is able to approach it without any misconceptions. So the comfort zone is that little time gap. Instant responses, I think people are still very cautious that, post Sashita Roor's episode, everybody's being very cautious about immediately putting their viewpoint in the Twitter.
Ask the channels to give you a guaranteed time space. They call 8, 9 people, especially one channel, and keep you on one corner and allow you one question, and thereafter there are plenty, of course, rebuttals there, and you don't get across your point of view as fiercely as you have put right now. We want you to argue.
We need to argue, we need to capture that space. We can't beg off them, we can't beg off them. We have to demand and we have to get that space. But that's something which has to be done by all of us individually and also through the party. I agree, we need to get that space.